Let's face it, parenting is the most important job on earth. Every day presents a stack of different challenges, and more often than not, the answer is outside of the box. On this podcast, we will offer proven strategies, interview pioneers in education, give insights into how to be successful parents, and even share our imperfect experiences of being parents ourselves. We're all in on this journey, and we will span the globe to find out what is working and who has the answers. This is the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast. Here are your hosts, Darren McCarthy and Brian Powers.
Welcome to the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast. I'm Brian Powers.
And I'm Darren McCarthy.
In today's episode, we are finally going across the globe. Darren, we're officially international with our guests, with Ush Dhanek. I think I'm saying that correctly, right? Ush?
Absolutely. And she says. It's like Bush without the B.
Yes.
And she's based out of Sydney, Australia.
And she claims herself to be an EQ ninja. That was one way she described herself, but focusing on emotional intelligence, an emotional intelligence coach.
Yeah, and after speaking with her, I absolutely believe she is a ninja.
We were very lucky that she got up and got up early to talk to us with the time change. It was tough to coordinate, but she did it, and really was talking a lot about, first identifying like what are the triggers, if you're getting frustrated with your child or frustrated with your spouse or both, how do you identify the triggers that get you to that point? That really was something that drove it home for me. And being able to, stay calm in the moment is another one that she talked about. That was a real nugget that I kind of pulled away from this.
Yeah, she was kind of honing in on the self-awareness piece, and what I thought was impressive was that it's perceived that EQ is a learned behavior, which puts her in the position of being more of a coach and kind of walking parents through that line to help their kids become more EQ. And she used the word, I'm an EQ parent. And then the other thing I was really impressed with was there's 15 to 20 questions that you can ask to engage your kids, which is a good follow-up to our conversation last week on family engagement. But it's that deeper dive into really making your children think along the lines of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, and like I said, getting deeper. So I learned a lot.
The big thing for me was when she talked about, so she was an attorney, grew up in the UK, and then moved to Australia, got into the HR industry, and then realized that she needed to do something more. And that's how she really got into, going into emotional intelligence and becoming a coach. But she talked about how at home she had to realize that, she's this A personality and out and in front, and her daughter's not. That was something that, for me too, it's like, you got to realize that your children are each individual, and yes, they're a piece of you, but they're not going to be a copy of you.
Yeah, this was. I'm so, like you said, I'm so glad she woke up early in the morning and shared this knowledge with us. And let's take a listen and share it with everybody else.
Yes, here we are with Ush Dhanek. Today, we're very lucky to have a guest from the other side of the globe. Our first guest international guest from Australia, and that is Ush Dhanek. Welcome, Ush. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. I know I'm all bleary-eyed because it's about 6:30 a.m. here.
It is.
You guys are behind me, right?
Yeah, it's about 2:30 in the afternoon here.
On Thursday.
Yeah.
On Thursday.
Still, this whole time thing freaks me out. But yeah, awesome.
No, this is great. And, I was kind of thinking that before we got on, is that I would say maybe even as little as 10 years ago, this would have taken a lot more to orchestrate other than just sending you a link and saying, hey, let's meet at this time.
I know. Technology, right? We're doing
awesome.
well.
But it allows us to kind of help spread our message. So why don't we talk a little bit about, or give us an introduction of, who you are, your background. I know it's pretty diverse. You went, kind of starting out as an attorney and and then moving to HR professional. But let's kind of give us a background of who you are.
Yeah, sure. So, do I still sound a bit pommy to you guys? I hope I do.
No, you sound great. Yep.
Sound great.
Okay, so I don't sound too Aussie. So the reason I asked about sounding pommy is because I'm born in London. So I wasn't sure if I still had that accent.
We're New Yorkers. We can't complain about accents.
No.
There you go. So I was born in the UK, and my background's in law, as you saw. So I did the bar in the UK, and then I moved over to Australia about 15 years ago. And wasn't sure if I was going to stay in Sydney or not. So I didn't do the bar conversion, but I still went and worked in law firms. But I think you guys may have the same distinction there, that you can be a solicitor or a barrister, right? So one's
Correct.
more admin heavy and one's really like in your face talking out in courts. So I wasn't able to do the one that I loved, which was my passion, which was the bar. Hence, I'm a keynote speaker, right? So, so I sort of left the law, and went into sort of transitioned into head of HR roles, and sort of representing the government at appeals and tribunals and things like that. So, really enjoyed doing that. But then, as you said, Brian, there's part of me that goes, there's just something more to this whole life that we're in than a 9 to 5. And I actually remember, believe it or not, the tipping point of the day that I quit. It wasn't this whole long thought out process or anything, but it was me putting in leave. And I wanted to go home to see my parents in the UK, and my leave got rejected. And it sort of triggered me. And I was like, hang on a minute, like my whole ability to travel, my ability to go see my family is based on this one nasty person. I won't swear on the podcast, but
yes, we still have a G rating on this podcast.
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly. Remember the kids on. So who controlled when I could go home. So I literally, instead of applying for leave, I literally handed my notice in. And I came home, and then I'm watching Oprah on daytime TV going, hell yeah, I've quit my job.
It's always great in the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah. And then it got scary. Yeah.
So that was me. And then I quit my job, and I thought, right, I better do something. Got to pay my mortgage. And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm in the HR game. So I set up my own HR consulting business, and then a few red wines that week, bit of vanilla ice, and the business Collaborate HR was born.
Okay. Fantastic.
Wow. Collaborate, listen, right? I'm not going to sing that because it's too early, but
super exciting stuff.
That's what birthed my HR business.
Wow.
And then there was evolution from there. I guess you kept going.
Was. So, running HR for businesses that didn't have HR, I realized that a lot of HR professionals I met were quite transactional, quite compliant. They had a bit of a look and feel. It's like a cop, so you can smell a HR professional a mile off.
You don't fit the mold, by the way.
No, I don't, exactly. And they're very high IQ, very, process driven. They go to clients in suits, and there I was in my jeans and black T-shirts and Converse, helping people do HR. And it worked. And people said, you're really connecting with our people. And that's sort of when I dabbled in a bit of EQ, going, you know what, we need to sort of blend my EQ knowledge and skills. And at that point, I'd learned a fair bit about it just through books. And I was sort of teaching HR with EQ. And then as the EQ side was sort of taking off, I really just, landed into that full time. So I still run HR consultancy clients, obviously. But the predominant, bread and butter of what I do and live and breathe 24/7 is emotional intelligence.
Fantastic.
Wow. And it's, I can only speak from experience. It's probably something we should all live and breathe for 24/7 is emotional intelligence.
Yes.
In not only our work and professional life, but home life too.
Home life too, yeah. And I guess especially, as you transition from, a big, life achievement like that, or even a life milestone of, just quitting your job and going into business for yourself, it's a roller coaster of a ride, right? And to lean on the support of emotional intelligence is just huge. And I guess that's sort of what drove me to really push this out there, that we all need it, when we get cranky with our kids and we get cranky with our bosses and we get cranky with the people around us. And how do we manage that? so that we're still in the best possible light that we can be.
Yeah, no, it goes where I think all three of us have been entrepreneurs for, I know 15 years I was on my own, and I know Brian was on his own as well. And it was that old expression, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
And if you're not kind of looking inside of yourself when you're working for yourself, you're probably never going to do it.
No, and it's, I look at it too from, the stresses of whether you're an entrepreneur or the stresses of you're in professional life or you're in both because you want to make, the other work well, often we find that you take those stresses and bring them home. And then home is where, all of it comes out in messy form, one way, shape, or another. So, maybe we can talk a little bit about that and talk to us about like the basics of emotional intelligence and how you help your clients kind of manage that. The stresses of work, the stresses of family life, but how we can keep it manageable.
Yeah, sure. So with emotional intelligence, I guess just to start with what it means, right? So you probably heard me call it EQ. So EQ is the emotional quotient, which is the measure of emotional intelligence, right? So like the IQ is the measure of your intelligence there. And with IQ, you're sort of born with it. You know how smart you are, whereas EQ is a learned behavior. So it's something that anyone can learn, which is why I love it that I teach kids, but I also teach people in their 70s at, board level. So anyone can learn and embrace emotional intelligence. And I guess in terms of a simple definition, just so everyone understands what EQ is, it's the ability to manage our emotions. But then what you do with that is to use that information that you've gained to then manage the situations and people around you. So I really like that layman's definition, because what that's saying is that it all starts with self-awareness. So if we are not aware of how we're feeling, we're pretty much screwed with everything else, because we then can't use that information to go, well, how is my behavior affecting my family? How is it affecting my peers and my colleagues? How is that affecting everyone? So it's a lot of self-reflection work initially when I go into teach this stuff. It's around, what are your triggers? What upsets you and where are those triggers from? And a lot of the time our triggers are a combination of, a stressful event that's happening, particularly at that time in our life. But it's also, our triggers are also to do with our paradigms and our upbringings and, what we're conditioned to believe, by our parents and by our cultures and life that we've grown up with, which is why I love working with kids, because it's like, working with the parents, it's like we can say, hey, these are our paradigms, our beliefs, and we don't need to put that onto them. We can let them be who they want to be. And then that's where you find the frustration majority of the time with parents. It's like, hang on a minute, the kids aren't really, sort of operating the same way that I operated in when I grew up. And we're like, hell yeah, that's the way it should be.
No, it's fascinating. As you were speaking, I had this vision of a foundation. And when you work with adults or parents, or adults in the professional world, often the foundation has cracks, right? And so it's difficult when one doesn't understand what their cracks are. But when you're working with the child, it's almost like you're building that foundation from scratch. And that really falls in the exact line with what our philosophy is, that you have to go back developmentally and kind of not rebuild the wall, but build the foundation. Hence sound foundations, right?
Yeah.
So
and
I
think,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think it's also accepting that our children aren't going to be like us. And so I've got a 9-year-old going on to 19, and I'm a massive extrovert. I public speak. I do all of that. And probably when she was 5 or 6, she was probably the most introverted child I knew. And I just kept going, oh my God, like what's wrong with her? Like, she's not like me. Like, why does she not want to run off with kids and play and all of this stuff? And someone simply just said to me, and saved me probably thousands in psychology bills and psychiatrist bills, but they said, it's cool, she's just not like you. And it was like this aha moment of, partly going, yeah, that's cool. But the other part was, no, I carried her for 9 months. What the hell? She should be like,
how can I teach her everything I know if she's different?
yeah. So I think it's just accepting that, they are different traits and different personalities. And the other part, why I love teaching kids is I actually posted on it on LinkedIn yesterday, is that, if we're in that phase of getting frustrated and criticizing our kids all the time, and it's a really powerful phrase, but it really hit home for me when I learned EQ, was that the kids don't stop loving you, but they end up stop loving themselves.
Yeah.
And it's just, that blew me away, going, wow, like there's so many people that we don't even know what we're doing half the time with parenting. And if I can just help them in a tiny little bit to get more aware around how they are with their kids and how they behave, it might help them.
Right. It's well, this world, when we first started thinking about having you on, obviously we wanted to do some research and get a little bit of background. And when I think our general thought process when we use emotional intelligence is that I think most people have a thought in their head of what it might be. And then because that's kind of the process that I started spinning on, is okay, what do I think emotional intelligence is before I go on to Google and figure out what else everybody already, they already have figured out. And then the next piece was kind of, it almost feels like an abstract thought, right? It's kind of like when we use the words like self-awareness, there's people that literally will roll their eyes, right?
Yeah.
Self-awareness, oh my goodness, what is that all about? And that's it. And really, it kind of, a lot of times, to be honest with you, those seem like those are the people that probably need it the most, right?
Yes, 100%.
But we start to, one of our big things on the podcast is that we try to break things down into very simple terms. And so as a parent, I don't know that emotional intelligence is necessarily on their radar, but maybe there's some triggers that you have or some observations that a parent might see. You know what? This is something that we need to dive a little bit deeper on. It's like some not necessarily strategies, but more before that, like observations. Like, when do I know that this is something I really need to be looking at?
Yeah, good question. So there's two parts to that. And I think the first part is, like you said, the self-awareness. So it's about the parent itself. So it's things like, am I getting frustrated a lot more often than not around my kids? And obviously, as a parent, it's normal to want to pull all your hair out like Brian has. But you sort of know when it's happening a lot more. So the self-awareness piece is around the frustration. And the second part of that around the parent is around the communication. So, are you actually spending enough time with the kids and connecting and talking to them and asking them questions, as opposed to being, the routine of the day? How the day can just get lost in the routine of what we do with our kids, right? Bed, bath, book, school, homework. But in between that, are we actually having a conversation? And by conversation, I mean really cool questions. And I'll share this info with you, but it's 15 to 20 questions that you can ask your kids to start a really, interesting conversation. But, there's a well-known CEO, and she said that as a kid, she used to come home and her dad would say to her every day without fail, what are the 3 things you messed up on today? Yeah, like, what did you really mess up on? And she would say what the 3 things were. And it was a question she was asked every single day from when she was a kid. And then what he would do is he'd high five each one of those things that she messed up on. And then at the end of that, he'd give her a massive hug to let her know that it was all good. And then he's like, right, awesome. I'm so glad you did that. And then she said, as a famous, successful CEO, that she's actually American, that one of the things that she remembers that she was taught is this ability to embrace failure and not be scared to make mistakes, because she said that really helped her take pretty big calculated risks in her business and become as successful as she is. And she said, I've become fearless in that side of running my business. So I think it's things like that, with the EQ is are we talking to our kids? Are we saying it's okay to fail? Rather than being in that transactional routine of life that takes us over.
This is so timely, because our last week's guest had a training about family engagement, right? And so the concept that she was bringing to light was, it's important to be with family. And it sounds to me like you're taking it another step. So it's okay. It's good to be with family. Now, how about some thought-provoking questions, and how about taking a little deeper? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Great timing.
Yeah, and then a couple of the questions we teach the parents to use is to ask the child, when was the last time that I did something that made you feel loved or potentially unloved? And they say to talk to kids, believe it or not, they've done a lot of research on this, is, obviously talk to them while they're relaxed or while you're watching TV or a movie. But if you really want to connect, do it in the car. There's something about driving and your eyes are focused on the road, but then you've got, your kids in the back or the side next to you, and the ability to have and ask some of these questions to get some insights into what they're thinking is the car. I don't know why, but it works.
They can't go anywhere.
Yeah, but I also think it's the dynamic of, you're not looking at each other as well.
Yes. Yeah.
You're right, Darren. I think it's taking it that next level and, being with the kids, not just doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and it's like if you have these 15 questions or so that are, like I said, thought-provoking or take things to a different depth, then I mean, as a result, obviously you learn more about yourself as a parent, but you also learn more about your child that's right in front of you, and the example of, that you gave earlier, that my daughter's not exactly like me. Right.
Yeah.
So you learn a lot from that relationship and that connection. And then so from that concept, right, let's say these questions are thought provoking and it gets a parent to think, okay, EQ is something important on my plate. Now, what do they do kind of next? Okay, I know it's important now. Now what do I do? Where do I go?
Yeah, I think the next step for me is understanding why the child feels the emotions they feel. So funny enough, I actually got an email this week from a guy who's attended a couple of my workshops. He's got a 4-year-old going on to 5 daughter and a 1-year-old son. And he's like, she said, she has a massive meltdown anytime I try and engage with my son, and she screams, she shouts, and I said to him, we've just got to get behind what is happening with that emotion. If I can share with you, because I wrote this down to share, but there's a really cool thing that says behind a child's emotion, there's a reason. So the 5 are, if a child is mad, they're basically trying to tell you that things didn't work out as planned. Okay. If a child is sad, they're feeling a loss of some kind. Okay. If a child is displaying anger, it's because they want to control something they can't. If they're feeling scared, there's something about that situation they don't understand yet. And if they're embarrassed, it's because they can feel and see that they didn't meet the expectation required. So if we actually just break it down on those basic 5 emotions that every child is going to display, and that's the basic crux of every emotion behind a child. And if you can just logically look at it to go, right, well, they're displaying that emotion is because they're feeling this, then it gives you an avenue to go, right, well, if there's anger, it's because they're trying to control something they can't in the situation with one of my clients. So we had to work out a way to give this 4-year-old a bit more control around the situation. And the strategies that we came up with there were, if the young boy is calling out for attention, why don't we bring her into that rather than saying, oh, wait, no, it's not your turn. So how do we allow her more control over that situation? Or it could be, if he's crying, allow her to come and tell you. Things like that. So it's not rocket science, to be honest. It's just breaking down what it is that a kid's going to feel. They're the 5 things. They're not going to feel much more than outside of those 5 things at that age. And then if we can understand the meaning behind it, let's just put some strategies in place as a starting point.
And put those strategies in place, but also do the things like you're telling your kids it's okay to do, and that's fail. Because I feel like sometimes, I know personally, I'll go to put these into place and it'll be like, I'll strive for perfection and find myself beating myself up, on that side, saying, gee, I didn't get it done as perfect as I wanted it to be. So, it's just a matter of, allowing yourself to fail at the same time, you're teaching your kids to do.
Absolutely. And I think also, Brian, it's not only allowing ourselves to fail, but I think it's allowing us to lose a bit of control. which sounds a bit counterintuitive when we're talking about managing emotions. So I'm not talking about letting our emotions out of control. I'm talking about our rules, right? We all operate by a system of rules. And there was this one client, this is a really interesting story. And she said, I'm so frustrated because my kid just won't eat dinner at the table with me. And I said, so, talk to me about your routine. And she's like, I'm home with him all day. Dad's at work. Dad comes home and I've got this thing. Like, I just want us all to have dinner together. I'm like, okay. I said, what does he want to do? And she's like, oh, he just wants to sit on the floor early. And I'm like, so is the issue that you want to have dinner together, or is the issue that you want everyone to sit at the table? And she's like, oh, well, no, the issue is that I want everyone to have dinner together. I'm like, throw a picnic rug on the floor. Eat on the floor, right? And then transition him up to the table when he's ready. And she's like, oh. And then there was nothing that she could really say no to, because her need was, I want my family, it's 3 of us to eat together. And then she called a couple of weeks later and goes, you're not going to believe it. I was like, what? She's like, we did that. And she goes, we ate on the floor. It was really cool. She goes, it was actually really good. We spoke about different things. And she goes, he just one night at dinner sat on the table.
Wow.
So it's about letting go, right? Because sometimes we put so much resistance on little things like that with kids. I still do it, being an EQ parent. I still do it to my child. If she's not wearing something that I think isn't coordinated, I have an issue with it. And, she's like, and she comes back because she's coached. She's like, Mom, I'm just, showing my creativity here. And I'm like, you know what? You're absolutely right. You are.
Right.
And
that's fair. You know what, when you, I want to reel back a little bit on something you had said earlier, when you were laying down different emotions and tying that into where the child is and what they're feeling.
Yeah.
It makes me think of a person's ability, or a parent's ability, to kind of be in touch with themselves and utilize the right words. So, Dad's sad today. Dad's not having a great day. Dad didn't sleep. Everything always comes down to, at least in our kind of family construct, is like, Dad's tired. Like there's this one word that we kind of go to, or like, sometimes I'll use the word hangry, right? I'm hungry, so I'm angry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think we forget about it, at the importance of if we want our children to speak about emotions,
Yes.
it starts with ourselves, right? So it's like, and I've already learned in this conversation of 5 minutes that I'm not doing a great job at that, because I didn't grow up in an environment where it was like, but I didn't grow up in an environment where it's like, we're going to be outright and just say, I really feel sad today. And I think that's kind of before you can even say I'm sad today, because it starts with those simple words. And I know, for me, I'm going to take down what you just said, and I'm going to start utilizing that right away, because I don't think it's right for us to expect them to be so, fluid about the words they use about their emotions if we don't even begin the process.
100%. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things I always teach parents is just talk how you would talk to your mates. Like, we don't need to dumb things down for kids, right? So if you are saying I'm sad because of this, share why you're sad. If something's happened at work, or if something, has happened with a friend of yours, like, share what that is. The more we explain things in real terms, without dumbing it down, the better. There's actually this other really cool technique, which I'll share with you guys, that works really well, and it allows us to model the behavior. And it's something called the size of the problem. And it's really simple, and you can use it with any kids. So the size of the problem can be small, medium, or large. So if you've got a little problem in the morning, let's say you've got a toddler, and we use this example in the workshop, but their favorite bowl for cereal is not washed, and you've given them cereal in a different bowl, creates absolute meltdown, right? Parents will know. And at that point in time, it's okay, so what's the size of the problem? So a small problem is, we can come up with a different solution together, and we can fix this and go get a different bowl. A medium problem means, okay, it's a bit more serious and we need a bit more intervention. And then the large problem is, it's really serious, we need help, we may need to call, 000, 999, 911, whatever country you're in, and get some help around that. And by doing that, we start modeling the behavior. So one of my friends was sharing that, she was taking her kids to school and she locked herself out of the house, and the car keys were in the home. And she's been modeling these behaviors, and she's like, oh my gosh, she goes, Josh, you know what? it's actually quite a big problem right now. I think I'm going to have to call Dad because I can't take you to school. And he was all excited, all in detective mode, and goes, oh, Mom, how are you going to fix this? So what that's doing is, rather than having a massive meltdown in front of your kids and, which I know I would, just stand there and get really cranky and get really shout, you're using the common language that you've agreed to use in the home, which is, hey, this is quite a big problem for Mom right now. I'm probably going to feel a bit anxious, probably going to feel a bit stressed. Let's work on this together. Let's call Dad. Do you want to ring Dad and let's tell him what's happened? So it's managing that situation by using common language. Whereas if they've had a fall at the park and they scraped their knee, it's a small problem. What should we do to fix it? Oh, I think we've got a Band-Aid. Yeah, should we do that? Should we clean it up? So do you see what I mean? It's just using a common family language around.
I literally read a blog a week ago in the corporate world where they were using the tree as the analogy for exactly what you're talking about here. Is it a leaf problem? Is it a branch problem? Is it a trunk problem? Is it a root problem? Yeah. And so, it's like sometimes we need that language to kind of tie ourselves to, I think we always need the language.
And this will, this kind of prepares them to be, responsible adults in the long term and make decisions for themselves.
And it tells them also that big problems are going to happen.
Exactly.
It's not going to be a life of small problems, and it's okay. It's okay to have a meltdown when we have a big problem. It's okay to have a tantrum when that happens, because that's the way you display it at that moment in time. That's all good.
Yeah. Excellent. Wow. Well, this is, I feel like we could talk for another hour or two. So that, what that means. If you'll have us, we'd love to have you back.
Yeah, of course.
But
fantastic.
But this is really awesome. Definitely a couple of triggers, and we'll get all the things you referenced into the show notes for our listeners as well.
Yeah.
But let them know, how can they? What's the easiest way to get in touch with you? You have a website, correct?
I do, yeah. So I'm at ushdhanek.com.
Okay.
So that sort of shows me and EQ on the corporate side, but I, run parent workshops on weekends, work with kids, so all across the globe. So yeah, hit me up, and you guys want any advice, you want some tips, and want to run scenarios past me, which I get in my inbox all the time. Happy to share. And yeah.
Any chance you're going to videotape one of those sessions you got coming up?
Yeah, actually, I haven't done that yet, but I will. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great. It'd be great to see it in action. I know that these three little, what you would call little things are big for us. And especially from our parents' perspective, we always talk about how hard it is to find a place to start. And it's like, where of all the different things I have to think about, where do I start? And in a lot of cases, it's starting with themselves, which, listen, we can, we've got to find time for ourselves, and we talk about physical, social, emotional, and cognitive, ways to help ourselves. Mm-hmm. This ties in perfectly with them. Let's get a sense of your own EQ. Listen to Ush.
Right.
And that will only just push down to your children and the other, your spouse and everybody else in your life. So yeah, it's 100% true. So
absolutely.
Great stuff.
It's a gift that gives.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the early time on your side of the world to speak with us. And we'll definitely, like I said, get all the information in the show notes so folks can find out more information about you and the good work that you're doing.
Excellent.
Great stuff.
Thanks,
guys. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast with your hosts, Darren and Brian. Find them on social media at Sound Foundations for Parenting. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And we'll catch you next time on the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast.